Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And today we're going to talk about Spine 171, Contempt, directed by Jean-Luc Godard, 1963. Another film that's 50 years old. Okay, this film is very important to me personally. It's very important. And I use this film as marking the beginning of what I call my cinematic exploration. That began more or less when I started attending the College of William and Mary. I started off in August 2001, graduated May 2005, and actually this began more or less around 2000. I would say. There's some precursor stuff with 2001, but I think it really started to kick off in 2003 or so. And what really did it was that my mother got us a Netflix account, got the family a Netflix account. And so finally, whereas I was definitely used to the concept of renting movies, because I remember Blockbuster. In fact, there was a Blockbuster that was about a mile or so away from where we lived. So it was that concept was I definitely exploited. But as you probably would, if you grew up with it, you remember that sometimes the choices are fairly limited. You couldn't get everything. But with the introduction of Netflix, suddenly your palette gets your possibilities is more open. You can get more titles, and at that point there were more DVD titles, and there was more possibilities and such, and so thus you can easily enrich yourself. You don't have to depend on college libraries or a big city library. You can basically get pretty much any film that you want. If it's available, if it's made, if it's out there, chances are you're going to get it. So with that combination, and because of this awareness of a larger world, a longer history, and certain directors and periods of films and styles of films and all those things, I really wanted to see what was out there. Because while my experience prior to this was in some ways somewhat extensive, it still felt limited. I felt like there could be more. I felt that there was more than just Casablanca and Citizen Kane, that there were other films that were worth exploring. So I made it probably a combination it was both a conscious and a subconscious effort to explore cinema. And this film, I use this film, now, again, I say that cinema exists in pantheon. There's no monotheism in terms of cinema. There are definitely other films that were part of it earlier, but this one to me stands out because I watched it very early on as I was exploring this, and two, it's because of what the film covers. It made an impact on me personally, and I do feel that it helped me to get onto the road. And it's been and actually I still consider myself in the middle of my cinematic exploration. It hasn't really died in any big way since I started doing this back in 2003 or so. Wow, 10 years, good grief. So I'm still in the middle of that journey, but this one I feel like this is what started that era, and I'm still in it. So okay, so what was it about Contempt that makes it so special? Well, what initially got me interested in it, apart from the Criterion Association, and by the way, that was another big factor that helped me to get onto this journey, was because of seeing the Criterion Collection and their mission of putting out all these important films in the best presentation possible. That's a great incentive for you to explore film. apart from the Criterion Association, it was, and I think it was my mother who suggested it, and also she had very little idea of what it was. Like, I think she knew who Jean-Luc Godard was, but she also knew that I was interested in exploring film. So it was like, hey, this could help you. So, and I think the way she initially pitched it to me was that this was a film about filmmaking, and so why not? Let's start with the films that cover the subject. And yes, there's been plenty of other films about filmmaking, like Vertov's The Man with the Movie Camera. There's 8½, there's Peeping Tom, there's Robert Altman's The Player. To a certain extent, there's also adaptation. In fact, one of my very good friends, Alex Gagassian, I would say that in the course of our ongoing discussions, and we've been talking to each other for a long time, I would say that I think 30 to 40% of our conversations consist of us talking about adaptation. But at any rate, but Contempt is one of the films that is about filmmaking. And that was the initial impetus. But then, as I got into it, and as I got more into it, there was a lot to it. So, okay, why is this important? Well, for starters, it's my first window into Godard, and it's because of this. I think it's because of this film that I started, for lack of a better word, falling in love with Godard. What is it about Godard that I find so fascinating? Because Godard is one of those directors, just like with any director, you either love a director or you hate him. Or you probably just don't care, or you feel somewhere in the middle. But there can be extremes in regards to directors. So what is it about Godard that I like, or that I really like? I think it's three big things. One, Godard is someone who makes a plethora of references. Basically, anything and everything that fascinates him, whether it's quoting from Sartre or Faulkner or T.S. Eliot, to a furniture advertisement, to a popular song, to a newspaper article, anything that interests him, he puts in his films. So clearly he makes his films for himself. And doesn't apologize for it one bit. The other thing I like about him is, and especially in his 60s period, basically starting from Breathless and ending in Weekend, his cinema phase, if you want to call it that. But Godard, and actually this even continues to some extent after Weekend, but the other aspect of Godard that I like is his relentless experimentation. He doesn't settle for what's ordinary or what's expected. He's, if there is a new way of doing something, whether it's shooting a scene, whether it's telling a story, whether it's a genre, anything, he will try it. In that sense, he is an experimental filmmaker in, I would say, the true sense of the word. Experimental often gets this reputation of being difficult, or that it becomes a euphemism for I don't care about the audience, fuck you. That's really what experimental has become. But I say that experimental, I think, and when you really think about it, all experimental really means is just trying something. It's an experiment. If it works, you do it again, or it gets incorporated into something else. If it doesn't work, you know that, okay, this doesn't work, and we don't have to do that anymore. It's like the what's attributed to Thomas Edison in describing him trying to invent the incandescent light bulb. He says, I didn't fail, I just found 1,000 ways that didn't work. So Godard is relentless and always experiments with things. And because of that, it's in a way very inspiring, especially if you're somebody that, if you've ever looked at a film and you go, you know what, why do these scenes always look like the same thing? Why do we always do the same thing? Godard is a guy you can go to just say, oh, he did it like this. Okay, that gets you thinking. So in a way, it's inspiring. Godard's not the only one who does this, of course. Stanley Kubrick was known to be a relentless experimenter. But Godard does it, does this also, and he does it in a very captivating way. And then this leads into the other aspect of Godard that I really like, is that certainly this became very apparent when he was working in the 60s. And I think this even continues on to his later work. But there is a genuine love of cinema. He really, really loves the art form and the possibilities it evokes. And this is something that really, really matters to him. And in a sense, for all of his postmodern sensibility and perhaps posturing, I really think that at heart, he is a romantic. And maybe that's the other thing why I can like a lot of his films, and at the worst, I can tolerate them. There's other things I don't like about Godard. He can be confrontational, and sometimes in a bad way. But I would say that he's certainly interesting. And I have a few other Godard titles, and I will talk about them as they appear. So let's talk about Contempt. The story of Contempt is actually two stories. The first story it's basically the story about a film production, and then the other story is this disintegration of a marriage. So now to talk about each story. The filmmaking story, the one that got me into it, the situation is there's this international co-production based in Italy, and it's supposed to be a kind of modern-esque take of the Odyssey. And it's allegedly it's a American, Italian, possibly German, possibly French co-production. And this captures what was going on at the time, where in the late 50s going into the 60s, international co-productions were the thing. And so it captures that spirit. So the producer of this production is played by none other than the very huggable Jack Palance. Brownie points if you get where I got, if you understood that reference. Anyways, see, I'm being Godard right now. I'm just going to throw in references because I want to. So if you get it, bravo. If you don't, hopefully you'll find that amusing. Anyways, so Jack Palance plays this producer who, very appropriately, because even at that point he was known for playing gangsters and gangster types, then it's what better comment you can make about producers than to be a gangster. And like I said, with Man Bites Dog, you have a producer who's a serial killer that carries through. That plays out here. So anyway, so he's trying to get this production going, and the more you hear him talk, the more you realize that, oh boy, if you're somebody that cares about the art of cinema, this is clearly the villain. And it's also very clear that this is the villain for Godard. And like for instance, the justifications he has for certain things are, you feel like, really, you really are doing this. Probably the funniest one is in this co-production, the director is Fritz Lang, played by Fritz Lang. And now, okay, so why is Fritz Lang directing this production? The answer he gives is that the Odyssey needs a German director because it was a German, Schliemann, who discovered the ruins of Troy. That's the only rationale for it. Now, the funny thing is, between that and what goes on in the rest of the story, this in a way anticipates Troy. Because guess what? Troy was directed by a German director, Wolfgang Petersen. So I find this extremely entertaining to hear this and to see this. But anyway, so this production is fraught with tension, and especially between him and Fritz Lang. And what the producer, his name is Jeremiah Prokosch, which actually is a play on the actual producers of the production, Carlo Ponti and the uncredited Joseph E. Levine. Yeah. But anyway, but Prokosch decides, and this is where you see in the story, he decides to hire a budding playwright, pulp crime fiction novelist, very likely hack screenwriter to be the screenwriter of this production, to write additional scenes for the film and so on. And this is Paul Javal, played by Michel Piccoli. And so he's hired to do that. And so so he's brought into this already fraught production to try to work on scenes. And now, at the same time that this is going on, there's the other story, which is this disintegration of this relationship. And it's actually a marriage. Paul Javal is married to Camille, played by Brigitte Bardot. This is when she was known as the great sex kitten of France before she's known now as the crazy cat lady, who actually the really old crazy cat lady in the worst ways, including yelling out "Get off my lawn" and entering whatever racial epithet she wants to use at that particular moment. How the mighty have fallen. Anyways, but this relationship was probably already on the rocks, but this production doesn't make it any better, especially in the case of Prokosch. At one point early on, Paul asks Prokosch, why do you want to hire me to do this? And he says, because you need the money. He goes, well, why? And then he says, someone told me you have a very beautiful wife. So, yeah. Prostitution, anyone? But anyway, so, and it's very obvious that Prokosch has this interest in Camille. In fact, early on when Camille shows up at Cinecittà to see Paul after he first meets him, the shot is they're outside and they're in the screening rooms are in this building off to the side, and then she's far off in the distance, and then Paul's here. I'm saying this from my point of view, so you can just imagine kind of like that. So anyways, so Paul's here, Camille's here, and so she starts to walk, and then Jeremiah shows up in his Alfa Romeo sports car, drives right in the middle of this, bisecting them, and then showing up right then and there. And I forget how many times I had seen it, but when I saw it, I immediately thought of Zeus and Europa, which I'm. Oh yeah, this is the other thing that this film does. It mixes the Greek and Roman names. They always refer to him as Ulysses, even though he should be. If this is supposed to be the Odyssey, it should be Odysseus. They say Minerva as opposed to Athena, or I think that's right. Anyways, I'm already confused. So Prokosh showing up with his car, I kind of think of Zeus and Europa, where Zeus assumes the shape of a bull and chases after her. So I think that was supposed to be intentional. I mean, this like I said earlier, Godard is one to to put his films full of references, and some are more obvious than others. One reference he makes is during some screening of some rushes, some dailies. Prokosh is quite upset by all of this because you have these sort of kind of artsy shots and everything, and Prokosh is thinking, you know, this is not commercial. This is not going to make me money. I'm going to lose money from this project. What the hell are you doing? And he's mortified. And at a certain point, he pushes this stack of film cans, and causes this mess. And he says, that's what I think of that stuff up there. And then at a point, he grabs one of the cans and he throws it in a way that it emulates the one of the famous, well-known Greek statues where you're seeing the discus thrower and you see the motion and everything. So he emulates that. And then Ling, being he's the sardonic, sarcastic type. And you could say that he's the prototype for any and all YouTube commenters. Don't say challenge accepted after that. Thank you very much. So he responds by seeing this display. He goes, finally you get the feel of Greek culture. And then his response to this, he says, whenever I hear the word culture, I get out my checkbook. Now this is a play on something that Goebbels once said, whenever I hear the word culture, I get out my revolver. And in fact, okay, I have to say that this gets into another personal thing. In the class that I took at William & Mary, Philosophy and Film, this was actually one of the films that we watched in the seminar. And actually, I and a partner, we would do a presentation on this film. We would talk about some of the issues and themes and so forth from the film. And when I was showing that scene, I actually showed that scene. And then the moment I paused it. The image was Prokosh is behind Francesca, who serves as an assistant and translator, because Prokosh only knows English, Lang knows more than English, and there's like this constant go-between with everybody. Again, this is an international co-production. So anyway, so Prokosh is standing up. Francesca is in front of him. She's bent over, and because he's writing the check on her back. So the way that the positions are, it looks like he's doing something quite unsavory. And of course, this got a big laugh. It amused me. That's like, you know what? This is this says it all. I don't know if I actually said that, but I think looking back on it, that's probably something I should have said. You know what? This says everything. You know, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you and good night. Don't forget to tip the waitress. So, anyway, so that's the. Now, over the course of it, it gets more, and actually, as the marriage falls apart more, this affects Paul's attitude towards the production, and in fact, he decides, and actually Prokosh kind of suggests this too. Prokosh's theory about the Odyssey is that Penelope was unfaithful to Odysseus while he was away. And that this starts to plant a seed in Paul's mind, and also combine that with what was going on with his own marriage. He decides that he thinks that it's best to portray Ulysses. Again, this is going from the film. To portray Ulysses as someone who is not really motivated to go back to Ithaca, and that he suspects that actually the reason why he goes off to Troy, the reason why it takes him 20 years to get back to Ithaca is because in his heart of hearts he's very unhappy with the marriage. He suspects some infidelity on the part of Penelope, and so therefore he's kind of reluctant to go back. And when he does go back and kills off all the suitors, it's to prove something to her. It's to try to win her back. In other words, take his own issues and infuse it into the story, which also reminds me of Troy. The big criticism that people have dished out against Troy is that it is a very, very, it's more modern than ancient. Even though the look is certainly evokes that time period, the motivations, everything that's depicted is much more modern. There's no gods in it at all. There's no concept of fate. There's no concept of heroic virtue. It just feels, it feels much more modern in terms of the motivations, in terms of the characters. It is nothing at all like the Iliad. Now, even though that this is covering more the Iliad than the Odyssey, but I think it's the same. I think it's something very, very similar. So, again, this is why I find Contempt very amusing. Not only did somebody take Prokof's advice seriously and have a German director direct a film adaptation of the Iliad, but also somebody decides to make this very, very modern. Now, this is in conflict with Fritz Lang. Fritz Lang, and I think this is a combination of what Godard could imagine, because in a sense, Fritz Lang is not really playing him. He's sort of playing himself, but he's also playing a character that's created by Godard. But I also like to think that this is something that Fritz Lang himself would have done, you know, had he been in this situation. But Fritz Lang takes the purist stance. He sees this as he's making the Odyssey, and so therefore it's a very particular story. It was created in a particular time period, and this time period, you had these values, these things were important, and therefore those things should remain in this film adaptation. And to try to infuse it with something very modern and very contemporary is to not do it. You might as well just not film. You might as well just not call it the Odyssey. If you're going to be that radical in your adaptation, then what's the point of calling it the Odyssey? And that's the issue he takes with Paul, and as he's trying to defend his position. And that's the other aspect you get from this film, is that this is also a film about adaptation. The film itself is an adaptation of a novel, and so there's this constant commentary going on about adaptation, and then also the things that come with it, which also includes translation. And the fact that you have this character, Francesca, who serves as a translator, it also serves as a parallel. So there's lots of... So what makes this film interesting is when you pick out the different aspects, and also when you have those aspects pointed out to you, this is where the commentary track really comes in handy. So I want to thank Robert Stam for helping me to really, really appreciate this. I knew I was going to like this film, but then in subsequent viewings, and particularly with the commentary track, and particularly with reading other articles and things that have been about it, it's really deepened my appreciation of the film. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But anyways, but once those things are pointed out, then you go, oh, okay, that's what, and that's what there's a sophistication to what's there. And now you could argue that the reason why it's there is because Godard loads it with so many references and so many things that you almost have to make all those connections. So it's not, so there's not really, it's not a sophistication through elegance, it's a sophistication through abundance of different little data points. But I would say that if you can look at it in different ways and you can see all the different things that go into it, then it makes it interesting, I think. So certainly worthwhile. But so in the end, I don't want to give too much. I mean, this is probably one of those films I can go on and on about, but I want to try to keep some. I want to bound it in some ways. So So needless to say, that what happens in the end is that Paul eventually leaves the project. I presume Prakash eventually is just fed up with the whole thing, and then Lon finishes it. So that's the filmmaking part. The other story I mentioned is this disintegration, and this is where the really influential stuff really comes in for me personally. Like I said, Paul is married to Camille, and it actually sort of starts partly due to producer pressure and executive meddling. It actually starts with a love scene. It does involve, there is nudity. There is nudity in it. I mean, Bardot in the 60s. I mean, why not? And that's why you have executive meddling. But anyways, there's a scene between Paul and Camille. It's this very detached, very clinical, erotic scene where it's this laundry list of very banal declarations of love and just pointing out various body parts. Like, oh, do you like my thigh? Wait, do you like my legs? Do you like my thighs? Do you like my breasts? Do you like my face? And all this stuff. It's and this is something that Godard would do in other instances. That's sort of his idea of love. It's this very it's this very clinical and passionate thing. But anyway, so barring that, this is supposed to be the climax of the relationship, or this is like the best part of the relationship, because throughout the rest of it, the relationship is just going to go to hell in a handbasket. And it goes to hell in a handbasket in a big way, where there is, in the middle of the film, there is a scene that lasts for 30 minutes. The sequence lasts for 30 minutes, but it's mostly in this Roman apartment that they have, or this Roman flat. And it's this relationship, basically it's falling apart over the course of this time. And it falls apart in a somewhat slow way. Typically a breakup scene lasts for 5 minutes at the most. And not only that, but it's very powerful and very to the point. You get it's stated very clearly why the relationship falls apart, why the relationship is ending, and then that's it. It's pretty much like pulling a Band-Aid very, very quickly, or an instant kill. That's typically what you see with breakups. This, on the other hand, is a slow kill. This you are bleeding to death, and it's done where it starts kind of, it starts with just some exchanges, and then it gives way to some moments of petty sarcasm, and then there's this misunderstandings, and then there's some attempted reconciliation, and then it goes, and basically it's just this meandering thing where it just goes from emotion to emotion, and there's lots of dancing around with things. You never hear explicitly like you are this. There's lots of implications and entendres, and everything is just danced around. It's all over this course of this 30 minutes. Now, for me, interestingly, I had yet to go through a serious relationship before I saw Contempt, which also meant going through a breakup. But seeing it, I had this feeling that this is actually how breakups occur. That it's not just a 5-minute thing. That it actually is this very long, drawn-out, torturous process. Because what it is, it's an unraveling of a relationship. If it takes you a certain number of hours in the beginning to form a bond, likewise it takes an equal, if not more, time to unravel it. And so it's not cut in 5 minutes or so. You know, it's not something that just you cut it, you snip it, and then that's it. It's just this. It's almost like pulling a rope so tight that, and also putting a little cut so that the threads are frayed, and then as you pull it, it then starts to unravel and tense, and then finally snap. And it's seeing that it really left an impression on me. So much so that I eventually had this idea for a film called On Nights Like This. And what I imagined, the first thing I imagined was the structure of the film, which was that it was going to start with a breakup, and then this male protagonist, after the breakup, he would go about his life. He was recovering from the ordeal, and as he's recovering, he sees this other woman who looks like his previous lover. And then eventually it gets to a point where he does actually meet her, they talk, and then they start to form a relationship. That rises, and then it reaches a peak, and then it starts to disintegrate. And it will end the way he starts. Now, apart from that, I also knew from the onset that when that relationship disintegrates, basically the third act, I wanted it to play out in a similar way to what was done in Contempt. And so very early on, I knew that this was going to be a long scene. And I wanted it to be similar to what was there in Contempt. So in other words, I didn't want the quick and dirty breakup. I wanted something where it was this slow, almost painful process where it just goes all over the map. And I felt justified in doing that. Not just because, and also, strangely enough, not just because of what I saw in Contempt, but also, in so many words, what I had personally experienced. I went through something like that, where it was this long, drawn-out process. So the combination of the personal experiences, what I saw in Contempt, and also, and when I told this idea to other people, they agreed that their breakups were something similar in that regard. It wasn't the quick and dirty version. It was the long drawn out version. I felt justified artistically to do this. And interestingly, when people, there have been some people who have read the script of this, and they look at that scene and they go, God, you have like how many pages of this? I mean, and then the thing is, like, have you thought about like trimming this down? I said, no, I wrote it with that length in mind, and it wasn't and for starters, it wasn't just writing dialogue. It was actually, the scene itself was actually quite well structured. I knew how it was going to start. I figured out what points would be hit that would justify the length. Because to me, it was more about creating the impression. Because let's face it, there have been breakups that have lasted longer than an hour, than a half hour. It can take 2 hours or 3 hours, or sometimes over the course of several days. So in the one sense, it is a kind of compression, but it's not so compressed that it becomes unrealistic. It's the right amount of time where, on the one hand, it feels genuine, but at the same time, it also doesn't feel like you're just watching 2 hours of somebody battling it up, duking it out. And then that becomes a really painful process. So in that respect, just be grateful that Godard and I would give you a half hour. Because if we really wanted to be brutal to our audience, we would have given you the full 2 hours. Or even longer. How about that? A 3-hour film that's all about the breakup. I would say challenge accepted, but no, I'm leaving that to one of you. If you're watching this, if you want to do it, if you can pull it off, I applaud you, and I would do it. and I am a man of my word. At least I try to be. So there you go. So yeah, and again, this is a film that could probably go on and on about certain details and certain things you can draw from it. Again, there's commentary about adaptations in all of its various forms, translations in all of its various forms, the nature of production. Godard definitely has the view that actually for him, producers can be good or bad. A good producer is someone who supports the project and doesn't get in the way of the project's life. Bad producer is one who likes to meddle and get into things and insist on certain things, and it's more about control and having your way. And so that's the bad kind of producer. So, but he thinks that there are more bad producers than good. So, so there's that. Another thing about Godard, he likes to experiment with cinema itself. Again, and that's part of what that breakup, or that, it's not really a breakup because there's a few other scenes where the relationship really crumbles, but this is where, this flat scene, this apartment scene, is where the relationship really starts to unravel. So I think of it more as a disintegration of a relationship, that particular scene, not just a full-on breakup. But that disintegration scene was part of his relentless experimentation, where to him he thinks, why, and again, that's what I described, the 5-minute breakup, is something that you typically see in a film. And for Godard, and Godard looks at that, it's like, why does it have to be 5 minutes? Why can't it be, usually these things happen for much longer. And so why not do that? And so there's things like that. That's just one example among many of him playing with certain conventions and asking questions and saying, well, why does it have to be this way? It happens in the very beginning where the credits are not written, they're actually spoken. So you hear, this stars Michel Piccoli and Brigitte Bardot. This was a film by Jean-Luc Godard. The sound was recorded by William Savell. The film was shot by Raoul Cottard, and so on. Which, interestingly, this was not the first time that I saw this happen. I did see the film adaptation of Fahrenheit 451, directed by Godard's one-time friend, now no longer for all kinds of reasons, Francois Truffaut. And in the beginning of that film, the credits are actually spoken. I think this was in part because of his good friend, but also I think this also fits very well with the novel, because this is because that's a society where books are burned and are forbidden. So why would you have actual text show up as the credits? So that's why the credits are spoken. So this is a combination of, this is something Godard, this is something I saw my friend Jean-Luc do, but also this fits very well with the spirit of the book. And that is an example of this is the good side of experimentation. By doing something different and just trying it out, to say, well, we haven't done this, let's try it, let's see if it works. And you try it, and if it does work, it's going to get used again. And not only is it going to get used again, but there's also a meaning to it. So it's not just you doing it just for the sake of doing it. There's another purpose to it. So this is why I like films in general that likes to try things, to not just settle with conventions, not be complacent with conventions, but to try something, to do something that's a little different or that's a little bit unexpected. So I appreciate experimentation. I may not like the results of the experimentations, but I can certainly appreciate the spirit of it and the drive to do something different. And that's a really good example of experimentation done well. It's not this. It's not simply being difficult for the sake of being difficult. It's really just trying something different. So, yeah, I can go on and on about this. In fact, I will leave this as my last thing. I did notice, and I know other people have noticed, there are a lot of interesting parallels between Contempt and David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. To the point where there's a lot of intersections between the two. Both comment about filmmaking, and also, whereas Contempt looks at international co-productions, but mostly American money is involved, Mulholland Drive looks at Hollywood. But both deal with filmmaking, certainly commercial filmmaking. Both have a love story. Both have a character with the name Camille or Camilla. There's also a point where the character wears a wig. In Contempt, Brigitte Bardot Camille naturally has blonde hair, but she puts on a wig with black hair. In Mulholland Drive, it's the other way around. Let's see what else. There are power issues in regards to like who controls the film. Is it the director or is it the producer or the money men? In both cases, there's in fact probably the most telling similarity. Both films end with the word silencio. And that's actually said. Now, interestingly, I believe in Mulholland Drive, it's actually Spanish, whereas in Contempt, it's Italian. But the fact that they both end with the word silencio is quite telling. There's also a moment where sound is experimented as well. That's another thing that Godard liked to do, is experimenting with the technical aspects of filmmaking, and particularly with sound. So they both have that. So there's a lot of interesting little parallels between the two. Now, does this mean that David Lynch stole from Contempt? No. But I wouldn't be surprised if at one point he did see this, if it did impact his creative psyche, and then he's found and in the process of creating, some of those things were brought to the surface, and it was all due. So I don't think this was all conscious. This was certainly not conscious on Lynch's part, but I will say that it was probably more of a creative subconscious at play. Because again, when you make a work of art, it starts off as an emulation of things that you've seen before. You are mimicking or aping things that have come before it. But what makes a new artwork is when you are adding something to it. It's not just you emulating something that's been there before. It's you are bringing it in a new light. Again, it's not just doing something for the sake of doing it. It's not emulating a shot because it's been done before, or it's showing off like, hey, how much film I know. It's also what can you do with that shot? Like I said before with the spoken credits, the way that Truffaut did it in Fahrenheit 451, not only was it unusual, and he saw his friend do it, but it also fits very well with the spirit of that story. And so, yeah. So again, this was a very important film for me personally, and I would say that this is, it's a very important film. One of the most important films that I saw. Very influential in my own cinematic sensibilities, both the film itself and also Godard at large, and so for that, I know for myself it's very, very important. You may watch this and you can conclude that this is just tripe, this is nonsense, this is whatever. I mean, you may not like this, but I know I can say with confidence, and I don't apologize for this, this film really made an impression on me. And So I am forever grateful for this film and for Jean-Luc Godard in making this film, and that it has the impact and that I'm very grateful for the impression that it's made. And I can definitely see that in the way that I watch films and in the way that I would hope to make my own films. Like I said, so far I've written the script. I want to make this, so this is technically in the development stage. I'm looking for someone who can help me to make this all possible. So I'll say that this is where the shameless advertisement comes in. If you want to know about what I had written and see for yourself, you go to relate3.com. I'll also put it in the description as well. So relate3.com, and you look for Walk in Silence. That's another film I've written, but On Nights Like This. That's the title of it. There are about pages for each. I've actually written 3 films, and one of them was On Nights Like This. There's an about page for it. You go to it. The page itself has a log line, summary, synopsis, and a link to the script. So if you're interested in what I've written, and especially if you know someone or if you yourself can help out, let me know. And if you can really help me out, none of this faux nonsense, and no trolling, please. Okay, thanks, bye. Anyways, so there we are. Contempt. And until next time, take care.